I used to think nothing could rattle me in public. 67 years on this earth, building my company from the ground up, surviving a messy divorce, and raising my son, David, into the polished, ambitious man he is now. Those things built a thick skin. But I wasn't prepared for what my new daughter in law said on her wedding day. The ceremony was held at the Clearwater Botanical Gardens, the kind of place where the air smells faintly of orchids and money. David had met Nicole at a charity gala in Miami 18 months ago, beautiful, polished, from one of those families that collects country club memberships like other people collect stamps. I wanted to like her. I truly did. She was marrying my only child, after all. The day began with the usual mother of the groom awkwardness. The place cards had been printed in gold script, except mine. My name was misspelled, Grace Palmer, somehow transformed into Gloria Palmer. I laughed it off in front of the wedding planner, but the sting was sharp. Then I noticed the champagne during the pre-ceremony toast wasn't my favorite Laurent Perrier, the one David always ordered for me on special occasions, but some overly sweet sparkling wine I wouldn't serve to house guests. Still, I told myself, it's their day, not mine. I kept smiling, chatting with guests, letting the little barbs slide off me. That is, until the seating for the ceremony began. I discovered my chair was in the third row. Third row. The mother of the groom, sitting behind the florist's husband and Nicole's yoga instructor. I glanced at David as he escorted Nicole's mother, who had front row center, down the aisle. He didn't notice me lingering there like an afterthought. I swallowed the hurt, smiled, sat where they'd put me. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The air was warm, the light golden, and for a while I let myself forget the slights. When David said his vows, I could see the boy I'd raised nervous, earnest, trying to get every word right. That part was real. Or at least, I wanted to believe it was. But the worst came hours later, at the reception. The ballroom was a glittering scene, crystal chandeliers, white roses and towering arrangements, a string quartet playing a soft version of Can't Help Falling in Love. Guests floated from table to table, their laughter mingling with the clink of glasses. I'd just stepped away from my assigned table to speak to Evelyn, an old friend from the Chamber of Commerce, when I overheard Nicole at the far end of the room, speaking to a waiter who was setting a place for me at the head table. "Oh no," she said, her voice low but perfectly clear. "The help eats in the kitchen." For a split second, I didn't even realize she meant me. Then the waiter froze, glancing nervously in my direction. Nicole's smile was polite, sharp, poisonous. "She'll be fine in the back." I felt the blood rush to my face. My pulse roared in my ears. Guests nearby looked away quickly, pretending not to hear. And my son, David, was standing just behind her. He heard. I know he did. But instead of stepping in, instead of saying one single word to defend me, he turned to speak to one of his groomsmen as if nothing had happened. It was like watching a stranger wear my son's face. I stood there, humiliated, every muscle in my body taut with the effort of not storming out. All the other slights from that day piled together, the wrong name on my place card, the cheap champagne, the back row seat, and something inside me broke. For years, I'd invested in David's career. I'd mentored him when he launched his first investment firm, introduced him to my network, vouched for him when the banks were cautious. The very reason he'd been bragging for weeks about a life-changing deal was because I had negotiated the initial connection. $30 million. A partnership that could put his company in the national spotlight. Tonight was supposed to be his big announcement, a moment that would cement his status in the industry. But right then, I knew I wouldn't let it happen. I walked out into the marble-floored lobby, where the music was muffled by heavy double doors. Pulling my phone from my clutch, I dialed Richard Lawson, my business partner for 20 years, and the other half of the deal David was banking on. "Grace," he said warmly. "Enjoying the party?" "Cancel all contracts related to my son," I said, my voice calm and cold. There was a pause. "Grace, are you sure?" "We're talking 30, cancel them." "Effective immediately." Richard hesitated. I could picture him rubbing his forehead, calculating the fallout. "Understood," he said finally. When I turned back toward the ballroom, I could see David through the doors, laughing with a group of investors. He hadn't noticed my absence yet, but he would. And when he realized what I'd done, when it hit him that his career as he knew it was over, I wondered if he'd finally understand what it feels like to be publicly stripped of your dignity. I wasn't perfect. I'd made my share of mistakes as a mother, but I had never, not once, treated my son like the help. Tonight, the balance shifted, and something told me this was only the beginning. I didn't become the help last night. That sentence at the wedding just said out loud what had been happening for years, one careful inch at a time, until I could barely recognize the shape of my own life. After the divorce, I had a toddler on my hip and a checking account with $412 in it. David was 2.5, all curls and questions, and the kind of appetite that keeps a mother up at night doing math on grocery receipts. I rented a room above a nail salon that smelled like acetone and hope, and I started cold calling from a plastic card table I found on the curb. Grace Palmer Consulting sounded grander than it was. Me, a phone with a tangle of cords, and a filing cabinet that locked only if you breathed on it right. Rosa came first. She answered my flyer at the laundromat, detail-oriented, bilingual a plus. She showed up with a notebook, a pen already uncapped, and a face that said, "I do not waste people's time." "I'm Rosa Delgado," she said, "and if you hire me, we'll be a real company by Friday." She was right. By the end of the week, our invoices had headers. By the end of the month, we had clients. She brought cafecito every morning, scolded me into eating lunch, and walked David around the block when he got fussy so I could finish a pitch. If I am the spine of what I built, Rosa is the ligaments that held everything together. We added Cameron next, a PR wunderkind with loud socks and louder ideas. He called my willingness to take on ugly, complicated companies the grace effect. We didn't just fix reputations. We taught clients to tell the truth and survive it. Mr. Cho, a methodical, dry-witted accountant, set our books straight and our forecasts even straighter. And Lila Hart, an early client who became an informal mentor, slipped me hard lessons like folded napkins. Never sign anything you haven't read. Your name is a currency. Spend it like a miser. Beware the day boys with shiny shoes call you mama. David grew up inside that noise. There are photos he's 4, asleep under my desk with a blanket over his head and a highlighter in one hand. He's 6, sorting business cards by color. He's 9, standing on a milk crate to feed papers into the scanner. I taught him to make thank you calls the way other moms teach table manners. Listen more than you speak, I'd say, straightening his little tie before a client luncheon. People will tell you where they're hurting if you give them air. When the school called because he'd brought a stapler for show and tell and explained how he used it to make money stick together, I laughed until I cried. It changed like all storms you don't notice at first, a shift in the air, a pressure drop. He interned with us in college and came back full-time after. He was good, undeniably good. Numbers obeyed him. Clients melted for that easy grin. But somewhere between his first bonus and his first press interview, my son stopped looking at the company as the place that fed us and started looking at it as a story he could edit. "Mom," he said one afternoon, tossing a glossy mock-up onto my desk. "We're redoing the website. Cleaner lines, tighter copy, and we're going to foreground you." People buy the myth. The mock-up had my face on it, black and white and airbrushed until I looked like my own ghost. Below, 3 words in an elegant serif, the grace effect. "It's not a myth," I said. "It's 20 years of staying after the cameras go home." "Exactly," he said, triumphant. "We commodify that." I told myself it was harmless. If my name opened doors, then let it. We were still doing the work, weren't we? But then I started reading the copy he approved for speaking gigs. My divorce was a strategic pivot. Our poverty was lean startup mode. My nights hunched over spreadsheets became the founder's intuition. Somewhere in the editing, the fear was gone. The hunger was gone. And the woman who had cleaned offices at midnight so the landlord wouldn't raise rent was replaced with a tidy anecdote that tested well on focus groups. I started hearing our brand where I used to hear our people. And the introductions changed too. At a conference in Chicago, David slid an arm around my shoulders on stage and said, "Folks, this is the legend herself. My mother, yes, but more importantly, the origin story of Palmer and Lawson. The audience laughed at the practice line. I stood there, smiling, feeling the word origin bite like a small wolf. Origin meant past tense. Origin meant we've extracted what we need. Now please glow in the corner when we switch on the camera. When Richard Lawson joined his partner, he brought infrastructure, compliance muscle, and his careful, lawyerly way of asking questions that make men with secret bank accounts sweat. He also brought expectations. Succession planning, he kept saying. Governance. Reasonable. Smart. Necessary. And when he suggested I step back from day-to-day operations to protect the brand, I didn't hear concern. I heard quarantine. It was death by amenities. They put my office on the corner with an extra plant and a view of the bay. They hired a driver for me, so you can ride on the way. They upgraded my speaking fee and put a handler on my calendar. Each gift took me 1 inch farther from the messy rooms where money is made, the war room, the intake calls, the whiteboard stained with permanent marker. I could still smell the fight if I leaned into the air vents, but the doors started closing before I reached them. One Monday, I arrived for our crisis roundtable and found my name tented next to honorary chair. Honorary. The word throbbed. This must be a mistake, I said lightly, picking up the little sign as if examining a bug in amber. David didn't look up from his tablet. We're streamlining, Mom. You'll still approve top-line strategy, but Cameron runs comms now, and the legal team runs approvals. It's more efficient. Efficient for whom? For the company, he said. And the press. They want you at the front, not in the weeds. A week later, Cameron briefed me on a keynote in Austin. He handed me a speech with my name on it. We tuned the language to your cadence. My cadence, I repeated, scanning a paragraph about embracing disruption like an old friend. I don't talk like that. I talk like a woman who has been disrupted enough to hate the word. Rosa started bringing me her worries in teacups. They pushed your signature block lower on the contracts, she said, setting Jasmine on my desk like a warning bell. And client renewals route through David's office first. Because he's heading growth, I said, practicing the easy lie. She didn't smile. Because they want to make sure you're ceremonial. I should have fought louder. I can admit that now. I should have thrown chairs and broken a few of those glass awards they kept handing me. But I picked my battles the way mothers do, quietly, later, in corners. I told myself it was graceful to let the next generation lead. I told myself David needed to feel ownership. Somewhere between those narratives, I abandoned the most dangerous post in any company, the Watchtower. The clearest moment came on a Tuesday when we were pitching a logistics giant whose CEO was allergic to accountability but loved the camera. I'd prepped for days, old instincts humming, case studies memorized like hymns. In the boardroom, the CEO turned to me and said, "Ms. Palmer, your early campaigns were legendary. What would you do with us?" I leaned forward. David touched my elbow, almost imperceptible, and answered for me. "We have a proprietary framework," he said, smiling. Mom coined the term, but my team operationalized it. Mom. On a stage, into a microphone, across a table full of men who only respect what they can invoice. He had minimized me with a noun and a grin. After, in the elevator, I stared at his reflection in the mirrored doors. "Do you still see me?" I asked softly. He laughed, scrolling. "Don't be dramatic." Cameron called our dynamic iconic. Richard called it healthy tension. Nicole, long before she was the bride, called me inspiring and so chic, like a brand campaign come to life. She took photos of my hands on coffee cups and posted them with captions about grit. At dinner, she'd tilt her head and ask, "Grace, what's your secret?" I should have recognized the way she cataloged me, the way she tried on my sentences like accessories, picking what matched her dress. But I wanted peace. I wanted a daughter. I mistook her fascination for affection and ignored the way her eyes warmed only when cameras did. Meanwhile, the paperwork changed shape. My share classes diluted by strategic issuances. Voting rights rebalance for continuity. David began to speak in plurals that didn't include me. "We think, we've decided, we need you to amplify." A young associate, fresh from business school, referred to me in a meeting as our legacy asset. He didn't mean to be cruel. He was describing the architecture he'd been taught to admire, build a story up front, extract its equity, move the engine behind the wall. By the time the wedding came, I had my old name and the money the brand printed with it. That's it. The rooms I loved belonged to other people. The signature on the contract still said Grace Palmer, but the pen was weighted so heavily with other hands that my wrist ached when I signed. Last night, when Nicole told a waiter I belonged in the kitchen, she didn't invent a hierarchy. She simply stopped pretending there wasn't one. It should devastate me to write this, but it doesn't. It clarifies. My role didn't vanish. It was erased on purpose, carefully, profitably, by a man who learned from me and then turned me into the ad copy for his ascent. My son is talented. He's also the kind of talented that forgets who built the floor under his feet. I walked out of that ballroom and canceled $30 million because I finally remembered my first lesson from the room above the nail salon. Your name is a currency. Spend it like a miser. Or, when necessary, set it on fire where everyone can see the smoke. Rosa texted after midnight, "Estás bien, jefa? Are you okay, boss?" "I will be," I wrote back. But tomorrow is going to be loud. Because when a brand asset stops performing on cue, the men who arrange the lights tend to panic. And the daughter-in-law who loves a camera learns what it looks like when the lens turns away. Tomorrow, I'll open the books I allowed myself to stop reading. I'll call Richard first, then Mr. Cho. I'll walk through my own offices without the handler and ask stupid questions until someone tells the truth. And I'll invite David to sit across from me at the same plastic card table where this all began and ask him to explain where his mother went and who exactly he thinks is going to pay for the version of himself he's sold. He'll bring his smile. I'll bring the receipts. The morning after the wedding, I awoke with that same knot in my chest, the one that had sat there since yesterday's humiliation. I had barely slept, replaying the moment over and over, Olivia's painted smile, her careless flick of the hand toward me as she told the waiter, "The help eats in the kitchen." The way David didn't so much as blink, as if his mother being compared to a servant was just background noise. But this morning, I wasn't just hurt. I was resolute. I sat at my desk, opened the leather-bound binder that held my personal affairs, and turned to the section marked Trust Operations. For the past 2 decades, I had maintained an operating trust that oversaw the majority of the family's business holdings, investments, properties, and controlling shares in the company I had built from the ground up. 5 neat signatures later, I stripped David of every shred of authority over its operations. There was no announcement, no argument, no dramatic confrontation. Just a cold, calculated signature in black ink, witnessed by my attorney via secure video call. In that moment, David's ability to approve contracts, allocate funds, or make executive decisions was gone. He wouldn't even be able to sign off on stationary orders without my say-so. I closed the binder and felt a strange calm wash over me. But I wasn't done. I opened my laptop and began creating a new file, incidents. Date, location, witnesses, and a detailed account of every moment of disrespect, manipulation, or breach of trust that I could remember. I started with yesterday's public humiliation, then added the wrong name on my place card, Grace Harper, as though I were some distant cousin instead of the mother of the groom. The absence of my favorite champagne, even though the family knew I'd supplied it for every celebration for the past 30 years. My seat in the back rows, well out of view of the altar, as if my presence were a necessary inconvenience rather than an honor. By the time I was done, the list filled 3 pages. That afternoon, the ripples of my decision began to spread. The canceled announcement, the $30 million partnership David had been counting on unveiling last night, had not gone unnoticed. Guests whispered, and the tone was different now. Less, what happened, and more, perhaps she's finally had enough. At lunch, my old allies began to circle back, their voices lower, their words sharper. These were the people who had been there when I'd been just a determined young mother in a secondhand suit, juggling a toddler on one hip and blueprints in the other. The people who remembered exactly who had built Harper West Holdings into an empire. "Grace," murmured Howard Bellamy, my first investor and still a close friend, as he squeezed my hand. "It's about time you reminded everyone whose name is on the foundation stone." By evening, the message had spread further, not in the loud, scandalous way my son and his bride loved to court, but quietly, like the steady, certain change in the tide. People began to realize that the control, the real power, was shifting back to me. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as cornered as they had wanted me to believe. If you want, I can move on to chapter 4, where David begins to realize something is wrong and Olivia tries to smooth things over while really plotting her next move. That's where the tension will start tightening. The morning after the wedding, I awoke with the weight of yesterday pressing down on me like a second quilt. My eyes opened to the soft, familiar cream of my bedroom ceiling, but my stomach was in knots, the kind that don't come from wine or late night hors d'oeuvres. Yesterday had been a performance, by them, for them, and I'd been reduced to a prop. Olivia's painted smile, her graceful little wave toward me as she told the waiter, "The help eats in the kitchen," still rang in my ears. The waiter's cheeks had flushed, mine had burned. And David, my David, had simply turned away, as though I weren't worth the disruption of a sentence. But overnight, the humiliation had fermented into something colder. Not grief, not rage, strategy. I rose earlier than usual, dressed in a simple navy wrap dress, and went straight to my study. The space smelled faintly of lemon oil and old paper. The shelves behind my desk still bowed under the weight of 25 years of contracts, deal binders, and commemorative plaques from a life spent building something out of nothing. I unlocked the bottom drawer and pulled out the leather-bound binder marked Trust Operations. For over 2 decades, the operating trust had been the quiet heart of my empire, its bylaws written by my hand, its accounts fed by my instincts. It controlled the holding company, the commercial real estate, the investment arms, and the intellectual property that made my name more than just a name. Until today, David had co-trustee powers. The arrangement had been intended as a safety net, a way to give him training wheels before he took the reins fully. In practice, it had given him the illusion of equal control. I sat down, took my Mont Blanc pen, and signed my name 3 times. My attorney, Mr. Harlan, silver-haired, discreet, and loyal to me since my first lease negotiation, appeared via secure video link. He reviewed my signatures, added his own witness mark, and closed the file. "That's it," he said. "Your son is no longer a trustee. No voting power, no execution authority, no financial sign-off. If he tries to move anything without your consent, it'll be a breach of trust law." I nodded. "And he won't even realize it until he tries." When the screen went dark, I leaned back and let the silence settle. The air felt different, lighter, in the way a room feels once an unwanted guest has gone. But I wasn't done. I opened my laptop and created a new folder labeled simply, Incidents. Inside, I began a document with 4 columns: date, location, witnesses, and description. I started with the events of yesterday: public humiliation, incorrect name on place card, Grace Harper, as though I were some distant cousin, absence of my preferred champagne even though I had personally supplied it for decades, seating in the 3rd row, away from family. Each one documented, each one marked as a deliberate act. From there, the memories flowed like water through a cracked dam. The time Olivia referred to my penthouse as old-fashioned in front of the design committee. The strategic exclusion from a client dinner that had been mine to lead. David's repeated introductions of me not as the founder, but as the inspiration behind the company, as though I were a painting on the wall. It wasn't bitterness driving me, it was record-keeping. A paper trail. I wanted, when the time came, to be able to lay out the facts in a way that made denial impossible. By late afternoon, my actions from the night before had begun to ripple outward. At the wedding, the guests had been primed for a grand announcement, David's long-anticipated $30 million partnership deal, the one he had teased for weeks. Instead, nothing. Just a vague toast about bright futures and unwritten chapters. Now, the calls had started. Howard Bellamy, my first investor, left a voicemail. "Grace, I heard the announcement didn't happen. Everything all right?" The tone told me he already knew it wasn't. At a late lunch at the Waterford Club, whispers floated across white linen. People leaned in over their soup. murmuring in the quiet, careful way that said they were discussing something important but dangerous. When I stepped into the lobby afterward, I was intercepted by two figures from my past, Patricia Vaughn, who had been my first PR director, and her husband Charles, a property developer I'd once rescued from bankruptcy with a single phone call. Patricia hugged me warmly and said, with just enough volume for those nearby to hear, "It's good to see the real captain back at the wheel." That single sentence, simple as it was, spread faster than any press release could have. Within hours, three more old allies had called, offering their support, reminding me, without saying so outright, that they knew exactly who had built Harper West Holdings into the powerhouse it was today. By evening, I had the distinct sensation of a tide turning. Not a roaring wave, not yet, but the slow, certain pull of water shifting back toward the shore. People were recalibrating their loyalties, sensing the wind change. They might still smile at David and Olivia at the next charity gala, but in their minds, they would be hedging their bets. And the thing about hedging is, eventually, the safer investment wins. That night, I closed the incidents file and set my pen aside. Tomorrow, I would not confront David. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a shouting match. Instead, I would let him find out the way everyone else eventually does, by trying to open a door and discovering the lock has been changed. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. And the quiet kind is the kind people remember longest. I didn't confront Olivia about the insult at the reception. I didn't need to. People like her crave an audience. They wither in the quiet. What I did confront was Provenance. The Harper heirlooms live in a mahogany vault in my dressing room behind a panel that looks like molding. The key is a 6-digit code and a thumbprint, mine. Inside, the river pearl choker my grandmother wore when she met Eleanor Roosevelt, the Art Deco sapphire bracelet my mother pawned and then bought back the year I was born, and the emerald sunburst brooch David used to trace with his finger while I told him bedtime stories about women who built things that lasted. 2 weeks before the wedding, Olivia sent a flurry of polite little emails to my assistant, styling notes, heritage touchpoints, asking to borrow pieces for a Vogue-style photo session she'd arranged for the morning after brunch. She copied David. She didn't copy me. I said nothing. I wanted to see what she would do when the word no wasn't conveniently printed in gold foil. Louise has worked with me for 11 years. She came to me out of a public library on the South Side. Literally, I gave a talk there on small business permits. And afterward, a young woman with a shaved head and a backpack full of city maps followed me to the parking lot with a handwritten spreadsheet of every licensing fee I'd mentioned and a better system for organizing them. "I think you're sorting this the long way." She said I hired her on the spot. Louise has Chicago in her voice and locksmiths. In her blood, her grandfather ran a safe repair shop off Halstead. When people mistake her quiet for soft, they learn to spell consequences. The night before the wedding, I left the vault closed and the panel latched. The following morning, while hair and makeup were like machinery in Olivia's suite, the panel was, how to put it, magically ajar. The brooch was missing. So were the pearls. And that bracelet with the story baked into every facet. Louise texted one word, moved. "Let it happen," I replied. If Olivia wanted to dress herself in our history, she could do it for a few hours. I wanted to see her choose. I wanted to see David watch her choose. The next day's brunch was a production. A white cyc backdrop went up in the hotel's solarium, the kind of rented perfection that looks like daylight even when it's raining. There were garment racks. There were trays of tiny citrus tarts no one had the appetite for. There was Olivia in a bias-cut ivory dress that wasn't yesterday's gown, this one designed for cameras rather than vows, preening in front of a mirror while two stylists argued about whether the pearls should read warmer. I stood in the doorway, uninvited but undeniable, with Louise at my shoulder holding a black leather portfolio. "Grace." Olivia's smile snapped into place like a lid. "We're almost ready for the family shot." They thought the choker would be such a meaningful nod to legacy. She touched the pearls at her throat, my grandmother's pearls, as if legacy were something you could tighten like a clasp. "It is meaningful," I said. "That choker kept a roof over my family during the winter of '41. My grandmother wore it when she marched into a bank managed by a man who didn't like lending to women and walked out with an extension anyway. It's never belonged to anyone who couldn't carry its weight. Olivia's mouth stayed smiling, but her eyes hardened by a millimeter. And today it belongs to the Harper family. We're all one family now. Then you'll appreciate a demonstration of how our family handles provenance. I nodded to Louise. Louise stepped forward, calm as a registrar, and opened the portfolio. Inside were 2 documents and a velvet roll. She laid the documents on a side table, aligning them so the photographer and his assistant could read. The first was a 1-page chain of custody log, printed and notarized that morning, listing every heirloom and the terms under which each could be worn for public display. The second was a revocation notice, all temporary permissions canceled as of 10:12 a.m., signed by me in my capacity as primary trustee and conservator of personal effects. I never signed, Olivia began. You weren't asked, I said. You were informed. Louise, God bless her, didn't touch Olivia. She touched the jewelry. She slipped the pearls from Olivia's neck with a small twist and a softer apology than I would have offered. The room went preternaturally quiet. Even the stylist stilled, hands hovering mid-spray. Louise unpinned the brooch from Olivia's bodice, 2 precise motions, no snag, and laid it in the velvet. She circled behind, unhooked the sapphire bracelet from Olivia's wrist, and set it beside the others. Excuse me, the photographer said into the hush, trying for jovial. We're losing the light. You're losing stolen property, Louise said, not looking up. Olivia recovered quick. She always does. David, she called, her voice bright and thin. Honey? David appeared from the corridor in shirt sleeves and the kind of tight smile men wear when they've overpromised donors. When he saw the velvet roll, his gaze flicked to me. A calculation ran across his face and vanished. My son is many things, but he is not stupid. He knows what evidence looks like. Mom, he said carefully, is this necessary? I kept my voice even. Yes, the archive is not a costume closet. Your wife removed items from a secured vault without permission. That's theft whether or not the thief had a stylist. Color rose in Olivia's cheeks, not shame, never shame, offense. You told your staff to lay a trap for me? I let gravity do its job, I said. You dropped. We documented where you landed. Louise rolled the velvet shut and returned it to the portfolio, then held out a slim black case. I pressed my thumb to the pad on its lid. It chirped, accepted me, and locked with a soft click. Chain of custody resumes at 10:19, Louise said, initialing the log. She has beautiful block letters, each line an unarguable fact. Olivia tried one last angle. This is humiliating, she hissed, taking a step closer so the microphone wouldn't catch it. We have press here. This family will look like fools. No, I said. This family will look like it understands what it owns. The photographer cleared his throat, slightly green around the gills. Shall we proceed with just the bouquet? We shall proceed, I said, but not as props. I turned to the assembled cousins and friends and board members' wives who had drifted closer, hungry for the kind of story you can rinse your hands of later. For the record, I said, the Harper heritage is not a set of objects. It's the work that made those objects possible. If you've done that work, you'll wear them. If you haven't, you won't. No one applauded. Good. It wasn't a speech for clapping. It was a boundary put back where it used to live. On the way out, David caught my arm. You didn't have to do it in front of people. Neither did she, I said. But she counted on the room doing what rooms like this always do, smoothing over theft if it's wrapped in silk. He let go first. Back at my apartment, Louise and I laid the pieces on a felt board and photographed each one against a ruler, uploading the images to the digital catalog I started the year my mother died. While the files processed, we executed the second part of the day's work. I restored full control over the archives and access codes. We changed the vault combination and replaced the thumbprint with a 2-factor token that lives on my keyring. At the office, we rotated every server credential and revoked all guest accounts that had somehow grown permanent roots. Louise ran a permission audit on the cloud archive. Turns out Olivia's stylist had been granted read/write access to our historical photo library and high-res brand marks. That died with one keystroke. Switch the archive to vault mode, I said. Louise's lips quirked. Already there. Vault mode turns the past into a museum. Nothing leaves without 3 approvals. Every download is watermarked to the requester, visible and otherwise. If a file lands somewhere it shouldn't, it carries the name of the hand that carried it. At 4:07 p.m., a text from Patricia saw the retrieval. Surgical. Heads are swiveling. At 4:22, Howard, proud of you. At 4:41, a short message from Cameron, my Loud Sox PR director. If they try to spin, I'll strangle the narrative with receipts. At 5:03, David called. I let it go to voicemail. The transcript read, Mom, we need to talk. Olivia is upset. Can we find a compromise? I stared at the word compromise until it stopped meaning anything. Then I saved the transcript to the incidents folder and titled it, Attempted Reframing, Post-Retrieval. Drink. Louise asked, appearing in the doorway with 2 glasses of seltzer, the kind she keeps in my fridge because she doesn't trust me to hydrate under stress. Please. We sat at the big table that used to be a packing bench in my first office. The portfolio lay between us like a closed chapter. You all right, boss? Louise asked. I'm imperfect, I said, and surprised us both with a laugh. I should have shut this down months ago. I wanted to believe marriage would soften her. I wanted to believe my son would remember who taught him to count. Louise took a slow sip. People forget. Systems don't. You built the system. Outside, the evening slid toward gold. I thought of my grandmother stepping into that bank in 41, my mother buying back the bracelet she'd pawned, me teaching a little boy that provenance is not about sparkle, it's about story and stewardship. Olivia had tried to costume herself in our past because she thought the past couldn't push back. Today it did. Quietly. Completely. When the last access code rotated and the last log saved, I put the case back in the vault and shut the panel. The tiny motor hummed as the lock slid home. Chain of custody ends at 1728, Louise said, writing it down. Primary conservator, Grace Harper. Harper Palmer, I corrected, the way I always do when the day has asked me to remember the woman I was before the brand and the sun and the smooth rooms that sometimes swallow truth. Don't forget either half. Louise smiled. Never. Somewhere across town, photographers were editing out the gap where pearls should have been and learning that light can be beautiful even when it is honest. In our offices, the archives slept like lions behind glass. And in the quiet, unmistakable way that matters most, control padded back to where it belonged and curled at my feet. The discovery came, as so many betrayals do, in the smallest, most seemingly harmless way. Louise, my assistant of nearly 15 years, was sorting through the week's mail in my study when she paused, her brow furrowing. Grace, why are there invoices from Cartier, Tiffany, and a luxury travel agency in your name? I set down my tea. My name? She nodded, holding out the sleek white envelopes. One after another, I opened them, $27,000 for a diamond tennis bracelet, $14,000 for a designer luggage set, first-class flights to Santorini, a 7-day chartered yacht in the Aegean, all paid via my personal line of credit. My signature, perfectly forged, was at the bottom of each authorization. I didn't need to guess who was behind it. The bracelet had been gifted to Olivia's college roommate, an emotional bridesmaid gift, as she'd put it to one of the wedding photographers. The luggage? For David and Olivia's honeymoon. The yacht? A private getaway to be documented on Instagram with the precision of a political campaign. And all of it, apparently, courtesy of me. Louise looked at me carefully. Do you want me to? Yes, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Freeze everything. Block every outgoing transfer from every account connected to my name, and have John from legal draft to cease payment letter to every vendor involved. Effective immediately. It took less than 2 hours. Cartier, Tiffany, the travel agency all received formal notices that the transactions were fraudulent and should be canceled. By mid-afternoon, the Santorini yacht booking had been rescinded, the airline tickets voided. Olivia's precious dream luggage was returned to the boutique, the assistant manager apologizing profusely for any misunderstanding. That evening, while David and Olivia were at some post-wedding brunch, the first whispers began. At the club, an acquaintance leaned across her martini glass and murmured to another, "Did you hear? The Harper honeymoon might be off." Another chimed in, "I thought they were going to Greece. Apparently, they can't pay for it. Or rather, the Bank of Mommy has closed." Laughter, low and conspiratorial, followed. By the next day, the story had acquired new embellishments. Some said David's cards had been declined at the florist. Others swore Olivia had been seen arguing in the hotel lobby over a misunderstanding with the bill. It didn't matter what was true anymore. The perception was out, and in their circle, perception was everything. From my window, I watched as the carefully curated image my son and his wife had built began to unravel, thread by thread. They had prided themselves on being the golden couple, wealthy, photogenic, effortlessly above it all. But now there were cracks, and the people who had once fawned over them began to turn. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the fact that I had stopped playing along. And in this world, when the benefactor withdraws, the wolves circle fast. David called me that evening, his voice tight, almost brittle. "Mother, I've been hearing things. People saying you canceled the honeymoon. Is that true?" I didn't even bother to deny it. "I canceled fraudulent charges made in my name. You and your wife have your own accounts. I suggest you use them." Silence. Then, a sharp exhale. "Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" "Yes," I said, smiling faintly though he couldn't see me. "Exactly how you actually are." The line went dead a moment later. And for the first time in years, I slept soundly. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of leather and old ink, the kind of smell that tells you the walls have heard more than they'll ever repeat. Across from me, Robert Harlan adjusted his glasses and slid the new will across the desk. As requested, he said, "The majority of your assets, 75%, will go to the Harper Palmer Foundation upon your passing, to be distributed to educational and women's business initiatives. 20% will go into a managed trust for your chosen charitable projects, with the trustees pre-appointed. That leaves 5% divided between David and Olivia." I scanned the document. The language was airtight. The tone, pure granite. Robert cleared his throat. "Grace, you understand this will send a strong message." "That's the point," I said. "If they want more, they'll have to earn it while I'm still here. And so far, they've shown no interest in earning anything but my patience." He hesitated, then leaned forward slightly. "I need to be blunt. This could provoke retaliation. In cases like this, I've seen certain family members attempt to challenge mental competence. If they can convince a court that you're no longer of sound mind, they can move to assume control as guardians or conservators." I met his gaze. "They'd have to prove it." "Grace," he gave me the look he reserves for clients who've just stepped onto a chessboard without noticing the other player. "Proof isn't the only factor. All they need is enough noise, rumors, staged incidents, selective witnesses. You've already taken back control of the trust, the archives, the accounts. If Olivia is as ambitious as you've described, this may be her next play." I sat back, letting his words settle. He was right. Money wasn't the only asset I had left. My autonomy, my right to live without someone else's signature above mine, was just as valuable. And just as vulnerable. When I left Robert's office, the first thing I did was stop at the bank. I added a second verification step to my safe deposit access, a personal code phrase known only to me and Louise. Then I had lunch with Louise and told her exactly what Robert had warned me. "If they try it," she said without missing a beat, "we'll have them on record before they've finished the petition." That afternoon, I began implementing new rules for any interaction with David and Olivia. No private meetings. All conversations either happened in the presence of a neutral witness or over a recorded line. No last-minute drop-ins. Every visit required at least 24 hours notice and written confirmation of purpose. No unsupervised time in my home or office. Anything they needed could be brought to the lobby. It felt cold, clinical, but so does a seatbelt until you're in a collision. I also began quietly gathering evidence, voicemail transcripts of manipulative requests, emails with subtle rewordings of past events, receipts that showed just how often my name had been used without my knowledge. Louise set up a private, encrypted cloud folder labeled Guardianship Defense, containing every piece of proof. And for the first time since this started, I realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about protecting the company or the trust or even the family name. This was about protecting myself, my right to decide where I lived, how I spent my time, and who I allowed through my door. People think losing your money is the worst thing that can happen. It isn't. Losing your freedom while you're still alive, that's worse. I had spent decades building my fortune brick by brick, only to find myself building another kind of structure now, a fortress around my own life. And if David and Olivia thought they could breach it, they were going to find out that the woman they'd underestimated still knew how to fight. The hotel lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes between checkout and cocktail hour. I'd stopped in for tea with an old board member who'd been through one too many urgent meetings to believe in them anymore. She left for a hair appointment, and I lingered, flipping through the paper. That's when I heard it. Not my name, at least, not at first. Just the low, hushed tone of my son's voice, the one he uses when he's trying to sound decisive, but keep the edge out. I followed the sound to the alcove by the side entrance. There they were, David and Olivia, seated close, his knee bouncing, her manicured hand resting lightly on his arm. She's slipping, Olivia was saying. The canceled wedding announcement, the thing with the jewelry. People are starting to whisper. That's not confusion, that's control, David muttered. Exactly, she said, leaning in. But if we frame it as erratic, as not knowing what she's doing, we just need enough examples. Missed details, contradicting herself. Let me handle the social side. You just talked to the right people in finance and law. He hesitated. You're talking about a capacity hearing, Olivia finished smoothly. Guardianship, conservatorship, whatever they call it here. Once it's granted, we decide how the assets are used. And we can rebalance that will of hers. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My phone was in my bag, but I didn't reach for it. Instead, I slid my hand into the side pocket where I keep a small, black digital recorder, a habit from the days when deals could be undone by one person claiming they'd misheard a clause. I clicked it on. The red light glowed like a tiny witness. They kept talking. David asked how they'd prove anything. Olivia suggested inviting me to complex dinners and noting if I mixed up names. Bringing up old business ventures to see if I misremembered dates. Pushing me to sign documents quickly and flagging any hesitation as inability to process. Every word was calm, practical, rehearsed. By the time they stood to leave, the recorder held 11 minutes and 42 seconds of exactly the kind of proof Robert Harlan had warned me about. Proof not just of suspicion, but of intent. I waited until they were gone, then walked out into the cold air feeling oddly steady. This was no longer about defending my position like a wall under siege. This was about turning the siege into an open field where I could choose the battle. Back in my office, I closed the door and called Robert. Send it over, he said after I told him what I had. And Grace, make 3 copies. One for me, one for you, one offsite. Do not let that file live in only one place. Next, I called Louise. Come in, I said. We're shifting gears. When she arrived, I played the recording. She didn't interrupt. She didn't even frown. Louise has the kind of stillness that makes other people nervous. When it ended, she simply said, "So, we stop waiting." "Yes," I said. "No more defense. We take their platforms, their connections, their leverage, anything they can use against me. We do it slowly enough that they don't realize until they've got nothing left to lean on." She smiled slightly. "I'll start with the board access logs." That afternoon, we began dismantling them, not in one public explosion, but in quiet, surgical cuts. Olivia's advisory role in a Harper West community project ended. David's authorization to speak on the company's behalf at conferences revoked. Access to key client lists restricted behind new passcodes. The recorder stayed in my safe, its red light long since gone dark. But its contents had shifted something fundamental. For weeks, I had been bracing against attacks. Now, I was planning them. The difference was subtle but enormous. And for the first time, I was certain of one thing. By the time David and Olivia realized the tide had turned, they'd be standing on a sandbar with the water rising fast. The shift began with a lunch. Four of us tucked into a corner table at the Waterford Club. Patricia Vaughn, whose charity gala could make or break a season. Eleanor Price, who ran the city's largest arts foundation. Marjorie Bellamy, a real estate force whose family owned half the waterfront. And me. I didn't speak ill of Olivia. I didn't have to. I simply told a few true stories about forged signatures on gift invoices, about unauthorized withdrawals from my accounts, about misunderstandings over heirlooms. Each detail was framed with a sigh and a little shake of the head, as though I were reluctant to say anything at all. By the time coffee arrived, the conversation had shifted not toward gossip, but toward logistics. Well, Eleanor said lightly, we must be careful about who we involve in our events. Reputation is currency, after all. That was how it worked. No public declaration, no scandal splashed across the society pages. Just a subtle freezing of the air around David and Olivia. Within 2 weeks, the first invitations stopped arriving. A dinner at the Hawthorne Museum, no seats for them. A weekend at the Bellamy Vineyard, mysteriously full. Patricia's spring gala? The committee regretted that table space was limited this year. Then came the donors. A quiet word from me, never an instruction, always a gentle observation, was enough to make them reconsider pledges to David's pet projects. Uncertain leadership, they murmured. Best to wait and see. The flow of funds slowed to a trickle. David noticed, of course. At the next Harper West Holdings board meeting, he raised the issue. There's uncertainty in the air, he said. His tone caught somewhere between frustration and confusion. We're losing traction with donors and partners. Projects are stalling. We need to address whatever's causing it. Around the table, his colleagues were polite but distant. No one rushed to agree. No one rushed to defend him. I sat 2 seats away, flipping through the agenda. Uncertainty, I said mildly, often clears when leadership is steady, transparent, and respectful of the values on which the company was built. People tend to respond to that. There was a faint shifting of eyes toward me. And in that moment, David must have realized that the room he thought belonged to him had already turned. Walking out of that meeting, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't even about the company. It was about reclaiming something far more valuable, my identity. For too long, I had been David's mother, a footnote to my own story. Now, the introductions were changing again. Grace Harper Palmer, founder. Not inspiration, not benefactor, not legacy figurehead. Just what I had always been. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Some things you dismantle with noise, an announcement, a press release, a clear line drawn in public. Others you take apart in silence, one thread at a time, until the pattern falls away and the owner doesn't realize the rug is gone until his feet are cold. The first thread was a real estate development David liked to call his project, a gleaming mixed-use complex that was, in reality, funded entirely through an investment vehicle I'd established years before he joined the company. I sold the holding quietly, a cash offer routed through a trusted broker, the buyer sworn to confidentiality. 3 days later, David walked into a planning meeting to find the lead architect announcing unforeseen changes and the project on indefinite hold. He wasn't even copied on the final transfer documents. Next was the Tech Incubator Partnership, another David initiative built on my early capital. I withdrew the seed fund in a single, surgical transfer. Without the liquidity, their expansion plans collapsed. The press release they'd scheduled for the following month never saw daylight. It went on like that. The overseas import deal dissolved in mediation before David even received the quarterly report. The boutique hotel collaboration canceled when the investor consortium reevaluated strategic priorities. None of them mentioned my name. They didn't have to. And then there were the optics. Slowly, his name began to vanish from promotional materials, gala programs, and corporate events. Not removed, just absent. A brochure might say Harper West Holdings presents, without the "with special thanks to David Harper." Invitations went out bearing only my name and the company's. The effect was subtle, deniable, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. When the summer charity season opened, David found himself standing in back rows where he'd once been ushered to the front. Donors he'd counted as allies avoided his eye. One even asked, in my hearing, "Is David still involved with Harper West?" I never see him at the table anymore. And then the letter arrived. It was handwritten, an unusual choice for David, on company stationery. "Mother, I don't know what I've done to make you erase me from everything we've built. The deals I've worked for years are disappearing, and no one will tell me why. You've taken my name out of events, stripped me from projects. If there's something I need to fix, tell me, and I'll fix it. I just want to understand." I read it twice. Then I placed it gently in the incident's file and slid it shut. Robert had already finalized the paperwork to move the proceeds from the sales, millions, clean and unencumbered, into the Harper Palmer Foundation. We'd earmarked them for small business grants for women over 40, startups that would never get a hearing from the kind of men who now whispered about my coldness at dinner parties. I signed the transfer with a clear hand. None of this would go to David. Not because I wanted him destitute, he would always have enough to be comfortable, but because the money was never meant to be a trophy for neglect. By the week's end, the last of the David-led projects had vanished from the company portfolio. His colleagues called it market correction. I called it reclamation. And as the ink dried on the grand agreements, I felt no guilt, only the clarity of a woman who had decided that her life's work would not be inherited by someone who saw it only as a ladder for himself. It was early evening when the doorman called up to say David was here alone. No Olivia at his side, no overconfident smile in his voice. Just my son, standing in the marble lobby as though unsure whether to come up. I let him. When he stepped into my apartment, he looked smaller than I remembered, less the man who used to sweep into rooms with introductions rehearsed, more the boy who once sat under my desk playing with paper clips while I signed contracts. But nostalgia can be as dangerous as sentiment, and I'd trained myself not to confuse either with truth. We sat across from each other at the dining table. He didn't touch the tea Louise had set down. "I've been wrong," he began, voice low. "About a lot of things. About Olivia. About you." I waited. "I let her talk me into things I knew weren't right," he continued. "I should have defended you. I should have respected what you built. I see that now." Still, I said nothing. "I want to make it right," he said finally, looking at me with an earnestness I might once have believed. "I want us to be family again. No business, no money, just us." I took a slow breath, choosing my words with care. "David, an apology is not a key. It doesn't unlock the past, and it doesn't restore what's been broken. Trust is built over years in actions, not in one afternoon." He flinched, but I went on. "I don't think you came here because you suddenly remembered you love your mother. I think you came because you've lost your influence, your invitations, your projects. And now you've realized that without me, the world doesn't treat you the way it used to." He opened his mouth to protest, then closed it again. The silence between us felt like a truth neither of us needed to repeat. "I will always be your mother," I said quietly. "That doesn't mean I will always be your safety net. We can part without bitterness, but we will part. And if you ever want to find your way back, it won't be through my bank account or my boardroom. It will be because you've built something of your own, with your own hands, for reasons that have nothing to do with me." His eyes dropped to the table. After a long moment, he stood. "I guess that's it then." "Yes," I said. "That's it." I walked him to the door. He didn't look back. When the elevator doors closed around him, I felt no rush of triumph, no pang of regret. Just a quiet certainty that the chapter was closed. My life, my work, my name reclaimed. And as the city lights blinked on outside my window, I thought of the foundation grants being prepared, the women whose ventures would soon begin because of those funds. The future I'd chosen was already in motion, and it didn't need his permission.